Good morning, everyone. A lot of you know me. I'm Pallavi Ade, and I and Shreyas Deshmukh are the co-founders of Asian Pathfinders. We welcome you again for this Saturday morning's Fireside chat. This week we have Dr. Adil Rasheed, who will be speaking on a topic which is, I think, very, very contemporary and very important for all of us to listen and discuss. But about the topic, I'll leave it to the expert to speak. I'll just give you a brief about us. So we're Asian Pathfinders. We were started with the aim of having a platform for scholars, practitioners, academics, everyone to come together to have these dialogues and discussions. And I think during the coronavirus times, this became even more important because we were operating in silos, and we also like to have young scholars to come and present as well as learn here. So we have one young scholar right now who's going to be moderating this session. So just a brief guideline. I know Shreyas will put it in the chat, but just refrain from making any unparliamentary language comments, and also respect intellectual property. If you do post any defamatory comments, we would be forced to remove you from the group here. So please don't make us do that. And just a disclaimer, the talk is not intended to deintegrate any religion or political ideology. And sometimes contrarian points of view may be raised with the sole intention of seeking new perspectives. And I'll add this is that take it to what it is. It is a scholarly research and not something which we receive on our WhatsApp. So take it that way. And just our upcoming sessions. We also, a lot of you know, we have these panel discussions every alternate Thursdays called the dialogues. The next one is on adaptability of AI, which is the coming Thursday. And then after that, this Saturday, the one on 28th, we have a discussion on the whole Nagorno-Karabakh region and the overall Caspian and Black Sea region, the developments there. We have someone who's a director of a think tank in Armenia, Richard Girosonian, sorry, who will be speaking. And after that, we have on December 5th, Suhasini Halder. A lot of you know her, so I'm not going to introduce her. But yeah, those are the three upcoming sessions. How you can reach us, obviously, find us on social media. That's the easiest way. And about today's session, Radhika Halder is our moderator. Radhika will introduce Dr. Adil and make her opening remarks. But before that, I will introduce you to Radhika. Radhika is a geopolitical intelligence analyst currently at MitKat Advisory Services. She has worked in India and Nepal on security issues for the last few years. She's also the author of the book Understanding Suicide Terrorism, which was published by Routledge in 2019, and it was part of a research done for Center for Air Power Studies, which is a Indian Air Force think tank based in Delhi. And she's also published papers in peer-reviewed journals, and she holds a master's in IR from University of Sussex. So, and before I give it to Radhika, I'll just tell you about Dr. Adil's upcoming book. It should be available on Amazon and other online medias, and I'm sure bookstores too. We're very used to online media, but it's called Countering the Radical Narrative. If you don't know, there's also a previous book by Dr. Adil on ISIS. So do check out both his books, great ones for anyone who's researching this topic. So before I keep speaking more, I'm going to hand it over to Radhika to make her introductory remarks and then introduce Dr. Rasheed.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pallavi. I hope I am audible, visible.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Perfect. Thank you once again. Thank you for having me here to moderate such an important session. I wish everyone a very good morning or a good afternoon or good evening, depending on wherever you are joining in from. As you all may know, of course, given the topic of the day, we're here to discuss an extremely pertinent issue, rather I'd say a phenomenon that has been taking place over the past several years now. And I think most of you will agree with me that this phenomenon has been more prevalent during COVID or the last year or so. And so what I'm essentially talking about is this tendency of nations, governments, and people to move away from what you call the more sort of liberal democratic values, and or what we can also call as a decline of liberal democratic systems and institutions across the world. And this phenomenon sort of begs the question of what was the purpose of, democracies or liberal democratic values in the first place? Why was it celebrated, and what was so great about it? And when we look back, it kind of seems that, around the end of the 20th century is when democracies were really hugely celebrated. It seemed like there was this triumph of democracy. It was, of course, towards the end of the 20th century when communism seemed to have been fading, and it was a victory of democracy. Not just that, but democracies were also seen as the solution to authoritarian or dictatorial regimes, because power was taken away from, let's say, a dictator or an authoritarian ruler, and now given to the citizens for them to be able to make decisions, for their own, as to how they want to lead their lives. And so bringing the citizen closer to decision-making processes was the biggest sort of triumph of democracy. However, as with most systems of governance, I think democracies have certain inherent inefficiencies or challenges. And time and again, these have been sort of exploited or misused, in a manner of speaking, for the more undemocratic, or let's say less liberal sort of proponents to kind of take advantage of. Just to name a few of these challenges or inefficiencies, I would just name a few. There are, of course, a lot, and there are this phenomenon is taking place due to multifaceted reasons. So there's no way that I can list them all out, but some inherent challenges, of course. The first being a lack of trust in, say, political leaders. There's, of course, democracy faces this challenge of, while it does aim to represent as many citizens and as many groups as possible, it cannot possibly represent each and every single group or citizen out there. And so over a period of time, this lack of trust or lack of representation can become a huge challenge. The second thing would be, for example, this fear of multiculturalism. I think we've seen democracies, of course, propose globalization, sort of intermingling of different cultures, being transnational and globalized, which is, of course, we all agree, a great thing. But we've also seen a fear of this multiculturalism. We've seen, Brexit, we've seen, anti-immigration laws kind of gaining popularity in Western societies. Of course, the election of President Donald Trump, now things seem to be changing, but still it doesn't take away from the fact that there is a tendency to kind of, that shows us that citizens are increasingly scared of, democratic citizens are increasingly scared of this multicultural tendency of democracies. The third thing I would say is, of course, what we see in democracies is a rising inequality, so income inequality essentially. And that again, also over a period of time, can fester into huge frustration and can kind of push the citizen to prefer an alternative to, let's say, the current system. And like I said, so these are just 2 or 3 challenges that I felt that, were quite stark and are perhaps the easiest challenges to exploit by the less liberal or the more radical voices that then seem like a better alternative. I think COVID is the best example. We're in the midst of a pandemic. And at the beginning of this year, especially, there was, even now to a great extent, there was a lot of chaos, fear, uncertainty. There still is. I think these words have become so common now because we don't know what is next. And for many proponents of, say, the less liberal systems, COVID was the best example to say, look, liberal democracies have struggled to cope in the face of a pandemic, or some have even said that they've collapsed, right? And so COVID was an appropriate validation or justification for these voices. And COVID is a very big and sort of exceptional example. But what I'm trying to say with that example is that there are several small COVID-like situations that may arise sort of and have been arising, threatening liberal democracies or liberal institutions across the world today. So I just wanted to give you all a short introduction. Of course, we have an eminent speaker with us who will shed more light and is suitably equipped to shed more light on this topic. We have with us Dr. Adil Rasheed. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Rasheed is a research fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. He's also the coordinator of its Counter-Terrorism Center. He has authored the book ISIS, Race to Armageddon, that was published in 2015, and it's an excellent book, may I just add. He's currently in the process of, his next book is just being published, like Pallavi mentioned, Countering the Radical Narrative, which will be in bookstores soon. Dr. Rasheed is a noted scholar on counter-radicalization in India. He's also a student of Islamic theology and history. He writes extensively for Indian and international media organizations. He has work experience both in India and the UAE. And may I just add to that, that I have really been a huge admirer of his work. I've especially when I was researching terrorism, and I think he's one of those few voices that you can kind of, rely on in this gray space of terrorism studies. So with that, I would like to hand over to you, Dr. Rasheed. I think you have around 20 to 25 minutes so that we have ample time for taking up questions towards the end. I also request everyone to sort of keep themselves on mute while Dr. Rasheed is speaking. And if you do have questions, please just drop them into the chat box and we will raise them after Dr. Rasheed is done speaking. Thank you very much. And Dr. Rasheed, all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Radhika, for a very kind and a very generous introduction and a very good, insightful understanding on democracy and its and some of the ways in which things don't work sometimes when it comes to democracy and democratic institutions. It is really an honor and a great opportunity for me to reach out to a different kind of a wider audience through this excellent online forum, Asian Pathfinders, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And at the outset, I must clarify that I'm speaking here in an individual capacity and not as a researcher from MP-IDSA. These are only my personal views, and that my intention is not to offend the sensibilities of people following any political ideology or religion. I know I may be saying a few things in this talk that might seem a bit contrarian, and I may be even appearing to contradict myself at times. But if it seems so, I would try to explain myself in the Q&A session, hopefully. There was a time in early 1990s when the then celebrated political philosopher Francis Fukuyama had hailed liberal democracy's triumph over communism as the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, a period that he saw produce the final form of human government. Even his much wanted article was famously titled The End of History. But almost 3 decades later, an older and much wizened Fukuyama has become critical of his own earlier assertions and today warns us about the crisis facing 21st century liberal democracy in the wake of what he calls identity politics and new tribalism. Curiously, the situation is more grim than Fukuyama's admission would have us believe. Over the last couple of years, celebrated political philosophers of our times, such as Graham Allison, Niall Ferguson, Colgan and Cohen, J.J. Mersheimer, have in their several papers announced that the Trump administration might have already ushered in the dreaded post-liberal world order. In fact, we were to read some of the top news stories of the world in the last 1 month itself. We will find how beyond the curve the new normal lies. Just about a week ago, we received the tragic news that the supposedly defeated terrorist group ISIS had turned a soccer pitch in Mozambique into an execution ground where its gangs beheaded more than 50 people and that set fire to an entire village. In another development earlier this month, a UN report told us that the Chinese government had locked up to 7% of its Muslim population in internment camps, and that its agents stay, eat, and sleep in the households of the imprisoned Uyghur men as Hanification of the Xinjiang demography goes on. Then in France last month, Muslim bigots stabbed 3 people to death in Nice after the beheading of a school teacher, Samuel Paty, on 16th of October, a tragic and gruesome killing in whose response the French government projected offensive cartoons of the Prophet on government buildings, which in turn drew the now familiar madcap protests of enraged Muslims across the globe. It was again in this very month that we witnessed Donald Trump, the leader of the world's superpower and the free world, refusing to accept the results of the presidential elections. and a little earlier, failing to condemn the violence of white supremacist groups, and particularly Proud Boy, whom he asked to stand by as somebody's got to do something about the left. So on gleaning through such news within the span of a month, it becomes difficult even for the most ardent counter-terrorism and counter-radicalization experts to keep up the hope in the counter-terrorism operations or police-run counter-radicalization programs aimed at overcoming or thinking to reverse the cycle of violent extremism and radicalism that is rapidly proliferating around the world. Does this mean that violent extremism and radicalization are just a security-related problem, or has it become a larger societal issue, if not a major civilizational challenge, which now affects not one or two, but most cultures, societies, and religions across several continents? In all, has the time come to accept the cynicism of some people who view the enormity of the challenge posed by radical ideologies and violent extremism in the 21st century as the onset of a radical and illiberal new age that is a full-blown antithesis to Fukuyama's liberalist utopia? Such a proposition is in itself too dire to contemplate. At a time when the world has shrunk into a global village and all right-minded people would rather hope that the young Fukuyama of the 1990s proves to be right, or all hell might break loose. Technology has made mankind so interdependent that we cannot run the risk of reviving old atavistic conflicts and hazard the near extermination of the human race. As John Dobson puts it, the collapse of liberal democracy matters because it would lead to autocracy, and history tells us that autocracy frequently leads to war. In fact, both world wars were very much wars between liberalism and authoritarianism. And right now, the wolf has again started baying at the gates. One thing is very clear, that it is only through the assimilative and egalitarian tenets of liberal democracy that the future of mankind can be secured. No other ideology, religion, or belief system on its own could bring together human civilization at this critical moment of its historical evolution. Thus, it is in order to salvage liberal democracy from its present predicament that we have to study how and where did Fukuyama's end of history claim for liberalism go wrong, and what can be done to ensure that his wishful thinking becomes a lasting wish fulfillment. To this end, we will have to acknowledge the widening trust deficit, as Radhika was talking about, between people and liberal democracy. According to a survey by The Economist in 2019, only 32% of the French population trusts in its government, while the global average is 47%. The rise of the Yellow Vest movement in France for economic justice that erupted in 2018 is a reflection of this widening gulf. In a similar survey conducted in 2019, it was found that only 17% of US citizens, this is a survey done by The Economist, trusted their government compared to 40% of the population's trust in 2000. The problem of lobbying by big corporate houses in US politics and the murky world of campaign funding has eroded public trust in their elected representatives. The interest of big business and shadowy foreign interests is generally thought to have drowned out the rights of ordinary citizens. The other critical reasons for the decline of liberalism is the growing irrelevance and the consequent decline of international organizations that were formed after World War II. The rise of neoliberal states such as China and violent non-state actors as Al-Qaeda, along with multinational conglomerates with bigger turnovers than the GDPs of several countries, are now operating with virtual impunity on the global stage. Faith in the United Nations is presently at an all-time low. The World Health Organization is itself come under severe criticism, and not entirely unjustifiably, over its mishandling of the current coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization seems to be incapable of mitigating the US-Chinese trade war and other issues. The United States has already quit UNESCO in 2018, just as the United Kingdom exited the EU, and many countries have started leaving the International Criminal Court. The Security Council brokered P5+1 and Iran nuclear deal. The JCPOA, what I'm talking about here, is Another disaster whose consequences for global peace and security may be felt for several decades. In fact, there is a growing sense that most international organizations have outlived their purpose and many have already started folding up. No less than a third of international organizations established between 1905 and 2005 have formally ceased to exist, according to a Nestle OR report. Another curious development is the rise of totalitarian state capitalism in Asia and the Middle East, which is completely devoid of liberalism and democracy, and yet has become supposedly successful as a model of governance. For a long time, Western political scholars made us believe that the path to economic prosperity and scientific progress required a liberal intellectual outlook, free enterprise and capitalism, and an inclusive democratic polity that champions individual human rights. In principle, I still believe in this ideological premise, but in the short term, the authoritarian leaders seem to be ruling the roost. Today, we have totalitarian states headed by strongmen such as Xi Jinping in China, Vladimir Putin in Russia, Erdogan in Turkey, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and Prince Mohammed bin Zayed in UAE, trying to effect an economic revival and to some extent being successful without caring much about liberalism or democracy. There are even elected leaders who are reviling liberalism, like Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who proudly boasts of having created an illiberal democracy. Orban's close friend in neighboring Serbia, Alexander Vucic, is also a nationalist demagogue. Next to them is the virtual neo-Ottoman Sultan of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, busy turning historical churches and museums into mosques and openly supporting jihadist groups in Syria, Lebanon, and Libya. These leaders of the Balkan region point to a very dangerous sign for global security, as this has been the tinderbox of many big wars in the past. Winston Churchill once famously said that the Balkans has produced more history than it can consume. But if one were to study the decline of liberal democracy in the West, the rising tide of far-right extremism, one can largely agree with Derek Thompson, who attributes it to three contemporary trends: low birth rate of Western societies, the fragility of European welfare states, and the rising wave of foreign migrants. The far-right groups blame the general permissiveness of neoliberal mores and the advocacy of LGBTQ rights as responsible for the death of the institution of marriage, leading to declining birth rates in the West and a consequent need for foreign workers. Similarly, non-liberal support for environment protection is misconstrued as being detrimental to Western industries, forcing these companies to shift their centers to Asia, leaving behind predatory, too big to fail financial institutions for Western populations to fend. The far-right claims of state repression of ethnic and racial identities and of states compromising national interests at the altar of technocratic globalist leadership that is impervious to local and national interests is a complaint which is now resonant even among moderate segments of various societies. The last match to light the tinderbox has been the swarm of Muslim refugees from Syria, Libya, and other Middle Eastern states entering Europe in recent years, bringing in economic uncertainties to the continent and a series of terrorist attacks. Ironically, the rise of right-wing ideologues have also been able to drum up a narrative against the progressives and the left promoting identity politics. It is claimed that after championing the cause of the economically deprived working class, socialist parties have overplayed the issue of rights of racial and religious minorities that has led to them supporting radical Islamist groups and black extremist gangs. With growing economic challenges that began way back in 2008 global recession, the appetite for special privileges for minorities as well as for political correctness has started withering away. But the big question is, how do we address this litany of complaints against an apparently dysfunctional system? There is also a growing chorus of scholars today who argue that with the exception of Karl Popper and a few 20th century thinkers, democracy was never considered an ideal system of governance by political philosophers in history, and the present problems are in fact the exact symptoms that many of them had warned us against about democracy. After all, Socrates was executed by a democratic vote for simply having undemocratic views. Plato and Aristotle both objected to the dumbing down of the intellect and tastes in democracies and the catering to the lowest common denominator of mass intelligence. Even later philosophers like Montesquieu, Rousseau, Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, James Harrington, Oswald Spengler, and many others have questioned democracy either on the aristocratic nature of representative democracy or the influence of plebeian and non-specialist opinion on policies of democratic governments. John Locke, the great liberal, but himself a slave dealer, opposed universal suffrage. Others have pointed to the threat of majoritarianism, continuous social and class unrest, populism, which refers to politicians pandering to the emotive and irrational side of the masses and not addressing the real issues, demagogy, rebel rousing, and policy confusion and paralysis as the bane of democratic governance. I was surprised to find that the founders of the United States, particularly the framer of the US Constitution, John Madison, considered democracy as a threat to liberty itself, particularly individual liberty. For this reason, the United States is constitutionally a republic and is not the democracy it presents itself to many countries as a model worth emulating. This is very evident from its complicated system of electing its president or members of Congress. As the US favors individualism against collectivism, it considers democracy as having a collectivist streak, which becomes more pronounced in other mass movements of modern times like fascism, communism, and Islamism. The problems with capitalism itself are well known, some of which were brilliantly enunciated by Karl Marx, even though some of his diagnoses and his prescriptions arguably couldn't stand the test of time. But there is one particular French philosopher, Émile Durkheim, who best enunciates why modern liberalism and capitalism often leads to religious and racial radicalism among the youth. Durkheim says that the absence of an alternate ideology to Western capitalism leads young people to develop radical ideas, even suicidal tendencies. In his seminal work, La Suicide, written in 1897, Durkheim looked into one of the most inexplicable conundrums of his times. His surveys found that as countries become wealthier and more industrialized, the rate of depression and suicide also increases. Europe, with highest indices of happiness, have ironically very high rates, proportional rates of mental illness and suicide, particularly in the age group between 16 to 24 years. Durkheim found several reasons that lay behind the unhappiness of people in modern societies and their reversion to religion and pre-modern ways of living. According to him, the breakdown of social structures and families in a highly competitive capitalist environment, the rise of individualism creates a sense of insecurity in the population, particularly among the young. The failure to achieve professional success and financial prosperity weighs heavily upon minds, as it is believed capitalism makes it easy for anybody to be economically successful, although this is not the truth. Durkheim contends that education and intelligence does not always provide the comfort and solace that religion, mythology, and strong familial and tribal structures do. Thus, according to Durkheim, the religious groups have always established strong community ties of thought and action, virtually eliminated individual divergences, and thus achieved a higher degree of unity, solidarity, and integration than individualistic societies of the modern age, which promote free inquiry and thereby raise questions on basic beliefs, causing doubt and confusion and a great deal of existential angst. In addition to Durkheim's theory of suicide and depression in the industrialized world, there is also some problem with the decline in the scientific temper, if not science itself, in our times. By becoming the preserve of big corporations and government agencies, science today has started moving away from the ken of the common man. Just like religious institutions of yore, the average Joe has now started associating science and technology with a highly influential industrial and political elite, which is cold, distant, if not alien. Science is no longer the problem-solving ally of the past, but even the cause of many of common people's current problems, such as unemployment, mainly because of automation, pollution and climate change, as well as the production of weapons of mass destruction. Even computers and the internet are today being vilified as insidious means of mass surveillance or agents to bring about socio-political unrest. It is in this atmosphere of growing estrangement and mistrust that the irrational and diabolical messages of traditional and ultra-religious nationalist ideologies has created a yearning for simpler and less wired lifestyle. Even in contemporary science fiction, the fanciful flights of futurism, the expanding horizons of space and time, and the promise of medical breakthroughs have been replaced by grotesque dystopian constructs, post-apocalyptic futures, and irreconcilable moral dilemmas caused by failed scientific experiments. It is also ironic that even prominent advocates of modern science and rationalism, such as Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, and Sam Harris, espouse hard determinism over the principle of free will, long championed by votaries of liberalism. Man is no longer an agent of change or progress, as that role has been assumed by large profit-making corporations driven by highly mechanized and self-automated technology. Humankind is on the defensive, as machines are at the cusp of gaining mechanical singularity with minds more superior to humans and more unpredictably independent. In conclusion, I would say that it is the hubris of liberalism and democracy that has brought us to the current state of pass. Contemporary movements of violent extremism have no inherent intellectual merit to stand the test of time, but are simply reactions to the frequent lapses and failings of a malfunctioning liberal democratic dispensation. Modern radical counter movements are not ingenious enough to provide any valuable social, cultural, or political alternatives on their own. The world was aware of the problems with democracy, which in the absence of strong liberalist institutions like a free press or judiciary will invariably deliver totalitarian demagogues and rabid megalomaniacs. With poor education and non-critical thinking, the media will also try to dumb down its message to reach out to a wider audience. Thus, no one can argue with Churchill when he said, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." It is for this reason that the Bill of Rights was injected in the US Constitution, and fundamental rights are part of our Constitution and are part of its basic structure. Liberal democracy was not a self-operating panacea, but a goal we all have to constantly work for, even when it has been achieved. Liberalism and democracies have to be mindful of their inherent pitfalls and should be the first to acknowledge them. But I have faith that it is only liberals and democratically oriented people that will be the first to take heed and self-correct, for the radical extremists are denied such a privilege. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rasheed, for your wonderful talk. I think you're also placed, from my personal experience, I think you're also placed in a very sort of unique position, given your, of course, study of theology, as well as your research on terrorism, security, radicalization. So it gives us a very good sort of combination to shed light on this talk. I think we all agree that this is a topic of tremendous relevance and requires serious deliberation in today's day and age. With that, I think we do have some questions coming in. There have been a few prior questions before the session that had come in. There's a question from Pratish Ravi. Basically, it says, in recent times, we've seen a shift towards deglobalization. Do you think that protectionist tendencies are increasing and will keep on doing so, or is it just a phase in transit?
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question. If we are moving towards self-annihilation, if we are moving towards a time of conflict, if we are, this is a pushback against globalism. So it depends on the fate we decide for ourselves. So if we are able to overcome our own petty egos and our own so-called cultural and national and religious um, affiliations and the way we want to protect them, then we are definitely in a soup. And probably protectionism could lead to even wars. It is a tendency that either we will go the violent way towards self-annihilation because we are becoming a global village, invariably, inevitably, or we will all become one nation. We are moving towards a global citizenship in the next 50 to 60 years. Now, there is a last-ditch resistance by various cultures, religions, and people. So there would be this phase of great churning and great internal, um, uh, struggle. But whether we will be able to overcome that and rise to the next level of mass human evolution, or whether we will be bogged down by our past, that is the big question. So protectionism, I would say it's a much bigger question than protectionism. It's a question of how strongly we cling to our past and to our cultures. And there is also a problem with liberalism in that, but probably I can answer that at a later stage.
Sure. Okay. There's a question from Priyam Bhattacharya, who is the security intelligence lead at Momentum India. The question is, if you could give some insight into the existence of terror sleeper cells and their threat to businesses.
Okay. You see, acts of terrorism are very well planned. And there is a very slim sliver of time and space which a terrorist has to make the maximum impact. And in that, the impact has to be of a cumulative nature. It should keep on hitting the people at various levels and governments at various levels. So in that preparation, Al-Qaeda actually said that the center of gravity of the US lies in its economy. If you keep hitting its military installations, the about 200 military bases it has all over the world, it will not make any difference. Bin Laden said that we attacked in Cole, the submarine, it was just a scratch. It was nothing. The US was not affected. It was the World Trade Center and the economic centers where they hit to have the maximum impact. It is the economic centers which have been called the center of gravity by terrorist organizations. So it comes well within their, not just the sleeper cells. If you look at most terrorist attacks, they will happen, either they will attack hotels, foreigners, tourist destinations, they will use trains or aeroplanes, means of communication, because that completely disrupts normal life and businesses in a big way. For many months, people are wary of investing, of going from one place to other, and the entire business cycle, which is based on movement, goes kaput. So it is definitely in that very short time when they have to make an impact, they rather go for economic centers and on the number of poor innocent civilians they can kill to develop the terror and fear. And that is part of their equation. That is their cost and balance analysis. Unfortunately, that is the case. So yes, that is so.
All right. So I mean, I kind of will mix my question as well with the next question here. But basically, I know we've had a conversation about this separately as well, Dr. Rasheed. But I would like to also know your views on just generally radicalization in general. So it's not, we were discussing this last evening as well, that it's not necessarily a bad thing, radical in itself, or the meaning of the word radical is actually very different to what the connotation is today. So what are your views on that, as well as there is a question coming in about the post-liberal world today resting its kind of foundation on Islamophobia, or sort of there is this association or sort of negative connotation that is being put towards the word radical or towards a religion or towards an extremist view. How would you look at that, given your
Okay.
talk of it?
When we talk of radicalism or radicalization, it comes from the word radical. Radical comes from a Latin word which means root. So in politics, in terms of political movements, whenever there is a political movement which wants to completely uproot the existing socio-political dispensation and bring in a new society and a new system of politics, these people are radicals. Now, in the modern age, in the medieval ages, one king used to go and another one used to come in his place. The common man was not affected that much. The general public, apart from the hassle of wars and other things, they were not mentally or bulldozed or brainwashed to the extent as it happened in the modern times. It was, first of all, it was liberalism itself and the democratic order, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. They targeted the masses, and the ideas of intellectuals illuminated and inflamed the masses, and the mass movement started in the modern age. So you can say that they were radicalized against the monarchical order, and it was upstaged by the democratic system or the capitalist order. And the vehicle for that was the common masses. Then we saw the word radicalism. Actually, the American founders used to call themselves radical, and they used to take pride in being called radicals. And then you had communism, which again wanted to have a completely different society, wanted to throw away capitalism and have, in the name of a stateless society, they made the most statist kind of a dispensation. But that was also a radical movement. And in the 20th century, much of the 20th century, it was mainly the leftist movements which were very radical. And then came Islamism. Now, Islamism as an ideology is a decent ideology. Islamism believes that people like Maududi and Sayyid Qutb and others, that Islam is not a religion but a political system. It is a socio-political system. It is just like communism or any other system, that you cannot practice Islam individually. You have to actually change the social and political order to be a good practicing Muslim and for Islam's benefits to be visible in society. So it is this approach of turning a religion into a political movement that has been the main problem. And because of this Islamism, we have faced the problem of another offshoot of Islamism is jihadism, which is the militant offshoot. So there are Islamists who use the democratic means to come to power to bring about an Islamic dispensation. But then the militants, they are completely impervious and they are opposed to either democracy or socialism or any other Western concept, and they go the militant way. So this is a new kind of radicalism which has come, and it is a very pernicious kind of a radicalism, and it has nothing to do with Islam. Islam is just a religion. Mixing of religion with politics always creates these problems.
Absolutely, sir. I think in line with that, there's a question from Sushil, sir, who has basically said about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, where there's a shift from what used to be the unifying factor was Azadi, and now the shift has gone to more towards this sort of religious tendency of Islam. Like you said, Islamist tendencies. It's got very little to do with the religion, but Islam is being the motivating factor now. How do we counter that kind of youth radicalization, because it's very impressionable for the young minds?
Yes, there is. Sometimes I've felt maybe I'm wrong and I may be saying something because it's a contrarian forum, so I can say things. I find that there is some kind of an exceptionalism about Kashmiri people. Even the Kashmiri Pandit finds himself more distinguished than the other average Brahmanical Hindu of, say, Banaras. And the same thing happens with the Kashmiri Muslim. The Kashmiris do not like to take part in the mushayaras of other Indian Muslim brothers. They will not intermarry with other Indian Muslims or other Indians. They keep themselves like a little at bay. So there is this tendency within Kashmir of being a little separate from the rest of India. And I will include even the Hindu Kashmiri Pandits with that. They have a sense of exceptionalism. So when the JKLF initially started off, they were talking about Kashmiriyat more and about their Azadi more than about Islam. But then Pakistan stepped in and the whole idea of Islamism also came into the picture. And Islamism has been there throughout the Kashmiri movement. But it is an Islam. It was not an ideological Islam. It was not that you have to follow a Wahhabi kind of a rejigged, reprocessed kind of an Islam and a complete different way of life. It was the Islam which people had practiced over the centuries in Kashmir and in the region. It was more of a one team against the other. It was a communal situation. And but I think Kashmiris will not accept global jihadism. There are huge doctrinal issues. There are the Islam which the Kashmiris follow is quite different from the Salafi Ahle Hadith kind of Islam. Although Ahle Hadith has made inroads, that ideology has made inroads, but the Kashmiri people are fighting for their own Kashmiri independence. And if you want to be part of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, you have to do jihad fi sabilillah. You have to do jihad for the entire global caliphate. There is no room for any regional affiliation. Your own Kashmiri language or Kashmiri culture. Culture means nothing to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They want a global, they have a globalist viewpoint. And I don't think that Kashmiris will ever accept it completely. This is my personal view.
Right. Okay, I'm going to club a few questions now. There is a question about how you look at South Asia in the next decade or so with an increasing sort of radical and illiberal challenges. At the same time, Shreyas has also posed a question about how there are certain incidents that have taken place that give us a more optimistic view, whether it's a democratic coup in Malaysia or the change in constitution in Chile. There are protests in Thailand at the moment as well. And then, of course, on the other hand, there have been revolutions across, Libya, Tunisia, and Syria, also that provide a sort of growing anti-revolutionary mindset as well for the continuation of the status quo. So, what are your views on this, on the general, at a regional level?
Yeah, my general views about both regional. I mean, I'm not a philosopher, a political philosopher of global or regional dimension. But my general feeling is that the world order which was instituted after the Second World War, the global institutions, the value system, and all of that is under a severe period of stress. And this stress is going to continue. And the very basis of various constitutions of the world, which includes our own constitution, and which the rules of the game will change, whether they happen slowly, dramatically, drastically. It will vary from place to place. But that is what the trend is. That's why I'm saying it is a radical illiberal age. It is throwing away the post-World War II Bretton Woods economic system and the United Nations liberal democratic system. And what it will come up with, there will be wars. We always fight to come out with something which we agree upon. And this generation has not seen the world war of the past. So even our elderly leaders are now post-World War generation. So we have a feeling we want to fight. I hear a lot of people who say, "Bahut ho gaya, yaar, ab aar paar ho jaye, ek baar ho jaye." So the general idea is that we need to fight it out. There is no room for compromise. People don't like compromise. Compromise is a bad word. All radicals will talk about purity of intention and of no compromise, and everything should be pure. Everything should be purist. There is no room to mix and compromise. And whenever that kind of rhetoric comes out, you are looking at war, because you will have to do compromise in life. Even within your home, even with another person, even within yourself, there is a war going on of ideas, which you have to compromise. So the idea that we are not going to compromise, this is too much, and we have to take up take a stand and a very firm stand against things, that itself to me is an extremist point of view. But that tendency is increasing and radicalism is here to stay. That is what I think. And that applies to South Asia also.
Right. So I think there are a lot of questions about basically, what is the future for liberal democracies then, given these challenges, whether it is the growing inequalities that may cause unrest or, public disorder, or whether it is these inherent challenges that are coming in the way of fighting, let's say, militancy or, security threats. Given these inherent challenges within liberal democracies, what is the way forward, and how do citizens then, have a voice of their own?
Yeah, the way forward is that we understand that we are at a very critical juncture and we cannot afford wars, and that we will have to live with each other, and we will have to respect each other's cultures and religions, and we will have to maybe find a cohesive culture if possible. The Queen Elizabeth, when there were the reformist movement, there were Protestants and Catholics were at loggerheads. She created a new English ethos where Shakespeare and other dramatists created a culture outside religion. And all great statesmen give more importance to a syncretic culture which replaces religion and which brings various communities together to create a national culture. Akbar tried to have his Naurakans, which tried to create you had Tansen and others. You create a new ethos, a cultural ethos in which every community can participate. If you do not have national cultures where there is a suicidal cultural assimilation, then there is a problem. And I think it is a very critical time because the Europe is under a lot of stress. I think Europe is a big problem. The two world wars is a reminder. We generally think Europe is a very beautiful place. The people are so nice. But it would not take much for Europe to explode. And Middle East would be nothing in front of Europe once Europe explodes. So Biden presidency is the last ditch. He's a very old man. I don't know how much he can do, but that is our last ditch hope, our last hope. We have to support this phase. Otherwise, Trump is just the beginning, and we are going to see much worse in the future.
Yes, since you mentioned Europe as well, there is a question about the recent attacks in France and Austria, and so is this an indication that de-radicalization programs have not really been able to meet their goals? And what is the process of, in your opinion, integrating radicalized youth or radicalized individuals into mainstream society again?
Yeah, the issue is this, that that if Muslims do not accept and respect other cultures and the liberal system, they have had this problem for a long time. The same applies now to the European society. This is a big mess. They brought in the Algerian workers when Algeria was a colony of France, and they as part of the Marshall Plan to reconstruct Europe after the Second World War. And there was this colonial hang-up between the working class, the Algerians, and the French. The French were actually more egalitarian than the British. They actually wanted the Algerian people to be more democratized, and they worked towards that. But those tensions, that colonial tensions remained. It was a very violent Algerian independence which happened in France, and you find that racial and nationalist and then religious bitterness lingering to this day. So these are old grievances, historical grievances, and whenever there is a small incident, it provokes those old wounds, So no matter how much counter-radicalization work you do, 2 or 3 bad incidents just spoils everything. If you are having a bad television host, he can say something which can undo much of your counter narratives. He is giving such a vile narrative from one media source that it undoes everything. So these are very troubled times. I would say that probably the New Zealand Prime Minister or the Canadian Prime Minister, the way they have been trying to assuage, that works more with Muslim communities. The way the, what is her name? I'm forgetting her. New Zealand Prime Minister went.
Jacinda Ardern.
Yes, she embraced the ladies there wearing a shalwar kameez, although many Muslim men would have also liked to embrace her. But that created a kind of, many Muslims were saying that she should get the Nobel Prize. These gestures make a difference. So if you are projecting the Prophet's cartoons on government buildings and all, that was an unwise step according to me. That was going a bit too far. But killing of people is un-Islamic. The Prophet was stoned from top to toe in Taif by children and by the people of Taif. He did not curse them. He never cursed anybody. He never did anything against anybody. There were many people who came out to kill him, and he avoided that killing, and he never did anything to them. If the Prophet did not do any such thing, why are the Muslims so agitated? And they are living in, and if there is somebody who's making a cartoon, it's a Muslim who has been forbidden to make a cartoon. It's not for the non-Muslims. The law against making cartoons or pictures of the Prophet is for the Muslims, or of condemning or criticizing the Prophet is for the Muslims. It is not for the non-Muslims. So there are problems with the Muslim community. The Muslim community has been in a state of decline for the last 400, 500 years. And unfortunately, it is an ongoing issue. And now we are in a melting pot. So the less said, the better.
All right, so there is a question about the moderate center. And so increasingly, there's a growing trend where political debate and discourse is more, shifting from conservative to extreme to sort of even fascist. But we see the moderate center disappearing. And why do you think this is happening? What are your views about this? Why is this the only thing that we're discussing?
Yeah, extremists try to feed off each other. One person says something, the other latches onto it. And so the moderates get squeezed in between. There is always, they pick up the two sides, they like each other because they're so much like the other. There is a demonizing of the other. In fact, if you read the narratives of all extremist groups, it reads the same. It is just the labels. If you remove the labels and put another label to that, it is the same discourse. It is less about oneself, more about the other and the bad things that the other has done. And in that process, the moderates take it from all sides and they get squeezed. So the moderate voice, always they are being branded as collaborators, as being hypocrites, as the people, and they are being targeted because they are the people who come in the way of the extremist agenda. And that is unfortunately the situation. And this is going to continue.
Right. There's a question about Indonesia in particular. I know you did mention the region at large, but how do you look at the future of Indonesia with the re-entry of a radical Islamic leader? Will the country be more fundamentalist or will it be able to retain its liberal social structure?
You see, when there is economic, when there are major economic issues, when you have a country like Malaysia next to you, which has had an Islamist orientation for so many decades, under Mahathir Mohamad, and you have had Al-Qaeda, Gamal Islamia base, the Bali bombings of 2002 and all that. This process will continue. The democratic system also, there is a problem with the democratic dispensation over there. So there are citizens who are feeling left out. This will continue to happen as long as the world does not get its economic system in place, the general security situation improves. So Indonesia is not an exception to that.
Right. I think there is a question about national populism in general, and how do we counter this in the face of loss in faith in secularism, and moving towards populist tendencies, whether it's towards one particular religion or just generally.
It is very easy, like for a person like Erdogan, if the economy is not performing well, he's not governing well, He's not able to bring back the economy. So he can easily change a church into a mosque, and he can get all the votes back. So this is called demagogy. You don't deliver, you don't in terms of governance, and so you do one small act of provoke people of populism, and you are re-elected. And unfortunately, this is also happening across all cultures and all polities. So populism, uh, that is the thing. You attack the vulnerable part or the emotive aspect of human beings. We all have it in us. We have to accept it. We all have anger, fear, a kind of ego, and my religion is part of my being, my identity. So if anybody attacks my religion or my nationality, I'm hurt because I was born in that team. So I should be provoked by that. This thing is going to continue, especially when I'm vulnerable. If I'm not doing economically well, if I'm struggling in life, then my level of patience is very little. It is what one US scholar says: when you have nothing to lose, you lose it. So we are moving in that direction where there is an economic problem, there are political problems, and on top of that, our level of patience is decreasing. I mean, if you think, God forbid, if we had something even close to the 2008 Mumbai attacks, now in India, our society will be in a big mess. We don't have that level of patience we had at that time to have withstood that kind of impact. We would be a completely polarized country. So it just shows how far things have come and what is the level of vulnerability right now.
There is a question on a couple of concepts that are less sort of understood. You can just shed some light or talk a little about how important the awareness on these topics is. It's jihadist ideology or communalism or de-radicalization also in that point, in that manner. And with that, I also wanted to add my own question, which is, I think both radicalization and then de-radicalization are very misunderstood today. And I find the term de-radicalization also problematic in many ways because, how do you really go about de-radicalizing someone? So would you like to just talk a little about the awareness on these issues, whether it's jihadist ideology, radicalization, de-radicalization, what entails all of these concepts, or is there a need for the society as a whole to gain more awareness on them, or has it been, kind of the loose misinterpretation of it has, we've all kind of obsessed over it?
Yes, there's also one very interesting question. Can I just, I think we have not been able to take it. It's on liberalism and conservatism as a cycle. Victorian age was more conservative than Middle Ages, post-Renaissance. And it is very interesting. We talk about liberalism. Liberalism actually comes from conservatism. And but nowadays we confuse liberalism with leftist movements like progressives in America. Liberalism actually is closer to libertarianism, which says that the state should not intervene in the activities of human beings, that the human at the individual level should be completely free to do whatever he wants to. And that from there comes the idea of liberty and liberalism, that inordinate state intervention is not right. And conservatism respects other religions and multiculturalism. Whereas a progressive, or what is a laissez, or whatever the French concept of secularism is, that you impose a kind of a liberal ideology on people. And that also becomes a more dictative kind of it also is an imposition. And then that creates a problem. So liberalism has so many definitions in itself now that we need to understand the differences. And so I personally believe that liberalism should not indulge in social engineering, or the state should not indulge in any kind of imposition of ideas. There should be a respect for every idea. And even if we are behind the various ideologies, religious theologies, or whatever. We should allow all flowers to bloom. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. When it comes to concepts of radicalism, which we were talking about, uh, exactly you were talking about radicalism and de-radicalization, and what are other. So the problem is that the modern fighter of the jihadist kind is very unconventional. He's not fighting for any humanistic goals. Even the leftist was someone who wanted a society in this world, a different kind of a better society. This fighter is fighting an imaginary war for the next world in his own mind. So this person has no humanistic goals as such. And he has been completely brainwashed into believing that if he fights and dies, he will attain some kind of wonderful next life. So this is a kind of radicalization which we have not confronted. The bigger problem is that the psychological warfare here is that the terrorists try to radicalize the common people. They are, the information warfare earlier was to misguide or waylay the other army, the soldiers on the other side, the generals on the other side, or the leadership on the other side. Here they are trying to get that population, a vulnerable section of the population, onto your side, to recruit people out of civilian population. Radicalization means when a common law-abiding citizen turns into a terrorist. The process of conversion of a law-abiding citizen into a radical terrorist, that is the process of radicalization. Now, we are not, when we are taking any action against radicalization, it is at many levels. We understand that there are fundamentalists who are not radicals. We need to understand these definitions. A fundamentalist is a person who believes that the fundamentals of his faith, religion, or his ideology are the ultimate truth. And there is no truth outside that religion. But that person has no political agenda. That person does not want to change the government. That person is not a violent extremist. He's just a person who has a particular way of looking at things. A Buddhist may think that the Ashtangika Marg is the best way of achieving nirvana. A fundamentalist Christian may believe that it is only through Jesus that a human being can find salvation. This is a fundamentalist belief. This does not necessarily lead you to become a radical terrorist. A terrorist is a person who has a political agenda, who wants to bring down a particular government or a military or a society. He wants to make a societal change. He thinks that the society or the state is fundamentally evil, and immediate, drastic, violent action needs to be taken to bring down that system. So that is the radical. So there are people who are extremists also, but they do not ever in life do any act of terrorism. What we need to do is to make a firewall between a fundamentalist, an extremist, and a radical. Because the radical always wants this very vast pool of fundamentalists, which will always remain in society, and extremists, which will always remain in society, to become radical. And the job of the governments and the security agencies is that the radical is not able to do that. So that people who are following their religion and beliefs, they may continue to follow whatever their belief system is without turning against the state or against the law of the land. That is the work of the counter-radicalization drive. And in counter-radicalization, there are three terms. One is anti-radicalization, one is counter-radicalization, and one is de-radicalization. The anti-radicalization happens when a society is about to face a major drive by a new violent extremist ideology. So you are trying to disengage those people, you are trying to detect and do surveillance at the anti-radicalization stage. At the counter-radicalization stage, you are actually starting programs so that the radicalization which is happening at a general level in society is somehow mitigated. And in the de-radicalization stage, it is those people who have already become radicals, may have committed a few smaller crimes, who could probably be salvaged, reclaimed, from their errant ways, uh, some kind of religious counseling or vocational training or some kind of a rehabilitation is done towards them. So there are these three stages. Now, some of these give good results, some of them do not give good results. Even when it comes to de-radicalization, there are a lot of people whose lives are saved. The problem is that there is the issue of recidivism, that people go back to their old ways. But if you are able to save even 50 lives out of 100, I think it is worthwhile. The problem is that people say, oh, you see, that person went into a de-radicalization program and he ended up becoming a terrorist. That does not mean that that counter-radicalization or de-radicalization program was a failure. If there is a goalkeeper, you should see him by the number of saves that goalkeeper does, not by the number of goals he has allowed in. You can, and it's a constant process. It's not real science. And we are still working at the counter-radicalization programs. So the general tendency is to just reject and be dismissive about counter-radicalization. A few failures do not make the whole exercise futile. That is my defense of counter-radicalization. Yes. Anything else?
Yes, I think we've got just 2 or 3 questions more. So there was a question on the loss in faith in secularism, and that question was posed in the Indian context. So would you like to talk a little bit on the Indian context of secularism?
Yeah,
Today?
I think I can bring back one of my critiques of liberalism. Every philosophy has problems. Every religion has problems, and that does not mean that religions are bad or good, or political ideologies are bad or good. There is a lot of good in every religion, but there are also a few issues. Even when it comes to a human being or a scholar, there are some things on which they do splendid work, but we make very absolutist judgments about liberalism also. In liberalism, there is an idea which is a commendable idea of equality. And it is the idea of that all human beings are equal because it is the tabula rasa. It is that there's a clean slate. Everyone is actually equal, but all these issues of religious differences and social differences are taught to a person later in life. Okay. And that religion itself is a problem. And all kinds of traditional indoctrination is itself a problem. But there is an issue with this. There is a lot of good in traditional knowledge of every kind of tradition, every kind of religious tradition. There is a lot of truth in various cultures who over the centuries have found some eternal truths of life. And there is a lot to be gained. If suppose from the Indian Hindu tradition, yoga has become now accepted all around the world. What is wrong about that? It is something which the Indian religious tradition has given to the world. There's nothing wrong about it. So the idea with liberalism is that it does not find, sometimes it is too anti-traditional and anti-religion. And that is why there is a pushback against secularism. Because secularism sometimes becomes too ardent and tries to create a non-traditional society. And there will be a pushback against that. So whenever there is an absolutist position and a very hardline position in defense of any religion, any society, any culture, there's going to be a resistance against it. So I think that is the reason why secularism is not so popular these days, because sometimes it is felt that it undermines traditional way of life and even undermines religions in their, and especially those humane aspects of religions and what they can give to the world. So that is an issue which I think is the reason why secularism is under stress, where we can work on.
Right, sir. I would like to ask you if you do have more time, because there's just 2 more questions. I don't want to, in case you have other engagements, I don't want
No problem, I have plenty of time.
All right, sure. So the next question is from Pallavi. She says, in the age of social media and information consumed in tweets, how can you capture and keep the attention of society long enough to make the case for liberal democracy?
Okay. You see, it is the social media is a forum where you can actually unload all of the junk which is in your subconscious mind. So in a way, it is a cathartic release which you can have on social media. And probably it is that subconscious which comes out. Perhaps it could have its own, if we develop a level of understanding in the social media where we agree to disagree and we allow all this to come out. Sometimes it could be a cathartic release. I mean, it is better that your all the feelings within are expressed non-violently through social media. That could also be one way of looking at it. I think it's a phase. Let's hope it is a phase. We can only hope that probably mankind is in a state of evolution where it has been asked to become more non-violent if it has to survive. Now, it is up to us whether we really rise up to the challenge. Technology has made us ask many fundamental questions about ourselves, about our morality and other things. So it has thrown this challenge upon us. Let's see how we fare. So I will not be against technology as such, but it is a question, it is part of our socio-cultural evolution. Let us see how far we go with this.
Right. There's a question on by Hisham on your views on the use of Arabic language by terrorist organizations to name themselves. Is this a contributing enabler in brainwashing people from the Muslim community?
Arabic language.
Yes. Whether it's, the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda or, Ansar al-Islam, Jaish al-Muhajirin. So using this kind of language to name terrorist organizations, is this an enabler for recruitment?
No, you see, nowadays Pakistan is having some other resistance. They have started using English names for terrorist organizations in Kashmir because they want to convince America that this is not an Islamist movement, that this is a homegrown movement. So there are a few terrorist groups coming out with English names in Kashmir nowadays. That doesn't solve the problem. It's just it's a hogwash. Arabic, obviously, if there is an Arab terrorist organization, they will use Arabic names. And Pakistanis, Urdu being quite Arabized, so it will have Arabic names. But I don't see how Arabic is an issue in all this. Arabic, there's a lot of secular literature in Arabic. There are some very good modern philosophers, Arab philosophers, who are very secular and liberal. And there's a lot of Arab liberal literature in Arabic. Arabic has all kinds of literature in it. So there's no issue about Arabic as such. It's a language.
Right. So I think I'm coming to my last question now by Oliver. He says, have pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, the anonymity and resulting impunity of the internet, hankered attempts to recognize potential threats? So should video game designers, drug dealers, providers of masks be held accountable? Do educators reflect their institutions?
I'm sorry, I didn't get this question.
Would Oliver want to explain his question a little better? Perhaps I've just read it off as to how he's written it.
Okay.
So I think essentially he's trying to say the anonymity and resulting impunity of the internet, is that being used, proactively, in order to sort of mobilize people, as well as to what extent do educators reflect their institutions in that manner?
He wants to say that there are some dubious, insidious, secretive forces which are actually insinuating revolutions through the internet or radical movements through the internet.
Perhaps that's what he is indicating.
I don't have expertise on that front. I'm not into conspiracy theories that much, so I will not be able to answer that question.
I think Oliver's just unmuted himself, so I think he can ask this question. Yes.
Yes.
Oliver, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry, it's only my second time on Zoom, and I'm not familiar with the controls. I was wondering whether the anonymity of the internet, whether the providers should be held accountable for the hankering, or if there is hankering for recognizing potential threats when they enjoy such a degree of anonymity on the net, and whether this concept of laïcité in France, or the sort of new definition of jihad amongst I wouldn't say Muslims, but more Islamists. I think that's the terminology now. Whether the educators reflect their institutions, how much responsibility there is there.
I'm sorry, I could not hear the question. It was not very audible to me. I'm sorry.
Sorry, if I can just repeat, paraphrase it for Oliver. I think he was talking about internet provides an anonymity for people who use it. So he's speaking about the people who provide this anonymity, be it the platforms or the providers of these masks, as he would put it. Should they also be held accountable?
Yes, I think I for one know very clearly that there are many. I'm not talking about just anonymous people. On the YouTube, I found out that I should not be saying it, perhaps. You can easily write the Jaish-e-Mohammed leader's name, and you can find all his latest speeches against India. You can find a lot of jihadist literature in Kerala YouTube website. So it's on your mobile phone. You don't have to go to the dark web to get all this violent extremist literature. It is so easily available. And it is so difficult to even ask YouTube for a UN designated terrorist to be put off the list. I don't know when YouTube itself has censors in it, when it says it is for above a particular age or whatever, it asks your email. So it has put some censors there. Still, a lot of this extremist literature is very easily available on the internet. And the other problem is that it is only Salafi Wahhabi jihadism which has created the so-called jihadist narrative, which is considered to be an Islamic narrative. So Wahhabism, and that too within Wahhabism, it is not the Madkhali 85% Salafi Wahhabi of Saudi Arabia, who's a pacifist, who's called a quietist. It is a very small section of the Salafi Wahhabis who are out to change the entire global order. It is their narrative, which is easily available on the internet, which has been conflated with the entirety of Islamic thought and with all Muslims. And somehow it is projected as if every Muslim is a potential terrorist who's going to follow that narrative. So there is a lot of, so the internet is a problem, but even there are people who are openly saying things on the internet, let alone anonymity. They're brazenly coming out and saying things, and not in the dark web, but on websites like YouTube. So I don't know what we can do about checking all this material on the internet. I spoke in front of the Minister, Mr. Jitendra Singh, in a conference. I opened in front of him YouTube on the white screen, and I showed all the websites to him, which are openly available, ISIS websites, Jaish-e-Mohammed websites. And he said that some action will be taken. But it is obviously not so easy.
Radhika, if you may, I think there is a second part of the questions which Oliver asked. It's a, can I ask that question or rephrase it for Oliver?
Please go ahead.
So the second part, I think Oliver was trying to ask the question about the idea of evolution of idea of jihadism, because when the idea of jihad existed, then there was no internet or the cyber or anything. It
Okay.
was traditional jihad.
Okay.
So then there is a evolution in the idea of jihad. Now there is a cyber jihad and etc. So I think he was trying to ask that question. How your I think.
I think for that I have my new book coming out, because it tells you about what jihad is and how it evolved and how it was corrupted. In Islam, I would say this much. In Islam, in every legal system of Islam, whether it is Shafi'i, Hanbali, Maliki, Hanafi, which is followed by the Sunni Muslims, or whether it is the Jafariya system of the Shia, jihad can only be declared when it is taken in its militaristic form by a head of state. It cannot be pronounced by any religious leader. Only the leader of a country can announce jihad. When the Prophet was in Makkah, he was not having a state. He showed the other cheek. There were many of his followers who were killed, but there was no right to self-defense in Makkah. When he became the head of state in Medina, which had other communities also, which had equal rights, and there was no jizya in Medina, in the Mithaq al-Medina. When Medina was under threat from Makkah, and Meccan forces came and attacked Medina, the three wars took place then. As a head of state, as part of a conventional warfare of one military against the other, there was a conventional war. So there is no acceptance for a non-state actor to launch any kind of war in the name of jihad. Islam is against war, and at the first instance of a ceasefire offer, even if it is disadvantageous, all schools of Islamic law say that you have to accept that. Whether Muslims have done that or not, Muslim rulers have done that or not is another thing. Whether they have followed a defensive kind of a warfare is another thing. But this is the legal position. The other thing is that in my book, and if I would have made the slides, there is no room for killing of non-combatants, women, children, babies, or the cattle, or even the crops. All these things are very clearly mentioned, and whether or not the Abbasids or the Umayyad, the empire makers in their hubris, they followed these rules, because Sharia was never followed. And it is good that many things about the Sharia were not followed, but many bad things also were not followed. But when it comes to jihad, the Islamic fifth position, these are the conventional norms. Now, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the jihadist movement, which starts from Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb came up with the idea that there is no such thing as defensive or offensive jihad. We are in a state of jihad, it's always offensive. Then came Muhammad Faraj, who said that the term of jihad is it is a fard al-kifaya, that kifayat ke saath aapko jihad use karna hai jab aap pe attack ho jaye, and when there is no other political or diplomatic means available to resolve a conflict and it has been imposed upon you and there's an existential threat, then the head of a state can take military action. So it becomes a duty only when in a particular situation. Muhammad Faraj said that jihad has become fard al-ain, that just like namaz or salah or fasting or other 5 fard of Islam, this is also a fard, and it is a perpetual jihad. So it was Muhammad Faraj who was involved in the Islamic jihad movement which killed off Sadat, that he came up with a book, the Fard al-Ghair, in which he said that jihad is no longer should no longer be Fard al-Kifaya, it should become Fard al-Ain. Then you have people like Abdullah Azam, who said that you should leave your state and you should go to a far-off country like Afghanistan, and from there you start transnational jihad. Bin Laden comes in and he issues a fatwa in 1999 and then in 2002, where he says that killing of non-combatants is unavoidable, and so terrorism is a legal kind of a warfare. And he gives 8 reasons for this. He says that there is no longer the first generation of warfare, so there are no enemy lines, urban warfare is there, so there will be collateral damage. that the people who are fighting, the so-called civilians, they pay taxes and they vote in a democratic government, those states with then law enforcement and all that. So he gives his own crap to justify the killing of civilians. At the next stage, Zarqawi comes and even legalizes genocide, killing of the Yazidis, the Shia, the Christian, complete ethnic cleansing. So all these extremist terrorist groups, one after the other, they are withering away at the legal structure of Islam on jihad. They are the people who call themselves Salafis, that they don't do bid'ah, they don't do innovation, but in the very thing which they do most, which is jihad, so-called, they are doing the maximum number of deviations and the maximum number of bid'ah. And this they are doing in the name of ijtihad, which they do not follow in any other respect. So we should not take the interpretation of the extremists as the legitimate Islam. We should follow the interpretation of 90% of the Muslim community of the world about Islam. And there is enough scope within Islam to reform itself and become modern. We have to bring the Muslims around to that idea slowly and gradually. But when it comes to jihadist warfare, the extremists have been one after the other making changes, self-styled changes. Then you had this madcap person, Abul Wasab al-Suri, who came up with the idea that Nizam la Tanzim, anybody can take a car and run over somebody. No need to have any affiliation with any terrorist group or no sanction from any imam. You can yourself do jihad the way they are doing it in Europe now. So there has been over the last 100 years, one subsect of a subsect, one subsect of Salafi jihadis who are issuing one fatwa after the other and trying to completely demolish the jurisprudential position of Islam on warfare. Now, under the Abbasids, the entire Islamic theology came into its existence. The theology of Islam took 500 years to evolve. And there were a lot of interpretation of the Quran and Hadith. And there were many schools which came into existence. Many schools were thrown out of the window by the kings, and many of them were accepted. Within that theological structure, there were terms like Darul Kufr, terms like Darul Ahad, Darul Sulh. These terms were made by imperialist caliphates, which saw the other side as the non-believers and their own side as the believers. But once the Mongols came and gave them a thorough bashing in 1258 in Baghdad, they came up with the idea of Darul Sulh. You can do compromise with non-Muslims and you can live. These terminologies are not part of Islam. These terminologies are part of the foreign relations called CR of the Abbasids. So when people say this has come from Islam, this is an Islamic terminology, people need to have a better understanding of the evolution of Islamic theology over the centuries. So there is a lot of, you see, it's like any tradition, it's a 1400-year-old theological movement which is still happening. Now, something good is there in Allama Iqbal also. He says that why have you stopped ijtihad at Abbasid period? Why can't you reinterpret Quran and Hadith in the modern times? So yes, Irshad Manji talks about it. Many Islamic scholars talk about it. There is a need for that. But that is the views of the terrorists. They are the ones who are doing ijtihad. They are calling themselves reformists, and they are fighting an asymmetric form of warfare against the West, in which they are changing the rules of the game within Islam, which is not known to either Muslims or non-Muslims, which needs to be understood. So I will say this much, and there is much more in my book. Perhaps I'm selling my book here. But I have given chapter and verse and all kinds of recommendations in that. Any other
Excellent.
question?
I think we have reached the end of our session today. I think the questions will keep
End
on
of the
coming.
patience, yes.
No, not patience. So we can go on and on. You kind of sparked curiosity and a lot of thoughts I can see still coming up. I'm sure people can also get in touch with you separately as and when they feel the need to discuss these. Thank you so much for being here, and Dr. Rasheed for shedding light on this topic. A huge thank you to everyone who could make it today on a Saturday morning. Thank you for your participation, for your questions. I would also like to say it's been an absolute honor and a privilege to be here moderating this, this session. Thank you so much, Pallavi and
It was a
Shreyas.
great experience. I go a little over the top, but that's my nature.
No, that's perfect. I think I can see it from the comments and the questions. Everyone has had a great session. It was a great learning experience and great insights, Dr. Rasheed. I am sure a lot of people will love to get hold of your book. So keep an eye out on Amazon and other online sources. And thank you, Radhika, for moderating this session. It's a great way of moderation. I think you took all the questions, you took it on really well. So thank you for doing that, and obviously definitely to Dr. Rasheed for uh, staying on for so long and sharing his insights. And again, thank you to everyone who keeps joining on a Saturday morning. So and see you next week. We have two amazing sessions. One is on artificial intelligence, and one is on the situation in the South Caucasus. So we'll see you there. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, God.